$7 billion. That's how much Volkswagen is investing in Canada while canceling their American factory. The Audi plant they'd been planning for the United States? Scrapped. The expansion in American facilities? Abandoned. Instead, Volkswagen is building one of the largest battery cell factories in the world in St. Thomas, Ontario. 90 gigawatt hours at full capacity, 3 sprawling factories on a 350-acre site. Production starts in 2027. This plant alone will produce enough batteries every year for 1 million electric vehicles. And it's being built in Canada because the United States became too unpredictable to justify billion-dollar investments. German investment in the United States collapsed 45% this year. Between February and November 2025, German firms invested 10.2 billion euros in America, down from almost 19 billion the year before. That's not a slowdown, that's a collapse. And when those investments were canceled in the United States, they didn't disappear, they moved north. Volkswagen, Honda, General Motors expanding Canadian operations instead of American ones. Stellantis building battery plants in Windsor. The entire European automotive supply chain is relocating to Canada while American manufacturing sheds jobs. Trump called Canada the 51st state. He threatened tariffs to force compliance. He assumed Canada would panic and come running back to Washington. Instead, Canada kept building, honored trade agreements, maintained regulatory consistency, offered predictable energy prices, and delivered government incentives as promised. Nothing exciting, nothing dramatic, just boring stability. And in the world of billion-dollar industrial investments, predictable beats exciting every single time. Global manufacturers looked at Trump's chaos and chose Canada's consistency. That choice is costing America 59,000 manufacturing jobs since April 2025 alone. This isn't theory, this is happening right now. Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume said it directly in January 2026. Quote, "With unchanged tariff burdens, large additional investment cannot be funded." End quote. That's a CEO publicly stating that building in America no longer makes financial sense. In just 9 months of 2025, Volkswagen absorbed $2.5 billion in tariff losses. Not over 10 years. 9 months. That's $280 million disappearing every single month. Not for workers, not for equipment, not for innovation. Just for tariff chaos created by Trump's unpredictable trade policy. Today, we're showing you how Trump's 51st state rhetoric drove Germany to permanently relocate $7 billion in manufacturing investment from the United States to Canada, why German capital allocation committees now classify America as high risk, while Canada consolidates as the stable North American manufacturing base, how Volkswagen's St. Thomas battery plant is just the beginning of a $46.1 billion electric vehicle ecosystem being built in Canada, and why this shift is permanent, because supply chains and ecosystems don't move back once they're established. But before we dive into this story, if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories that truly matter. Let's start with what Volkswagen actually experienced in the United States. In 9 months of 2025, the company absorbed $2.5 billion in tariff losses. That's not a projection. That's actual money that disappeared from the Volkswagen's balance sheet. $280 million every single month. The way modern automotive manufacturing works, components cross borders multiple times during production. A single vehicle might cross the Canadian-American border 6 or 7 times before it's finished. Each crossing under Trump's tariff regime, another tariff hit. The math became impossible to sustain. Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume gave an interview to the German newspaper Handelsblatt in January 2026. His exact words, "With unchanged tariff burdens, large additional investment cannot be funded." That's corporate language for, we're done building in America. The Audi factory they'd been planning? Cancelled. No announcement ceremony, no dramatic press conference. The project just quietly disappeared from capital allocation budgets. The jobs that were supposed to be created, they never existed. And here's what's critical. Those jobs didn't vanish into thin air. They relocated to Canada. Canada's response wasn't to beg Volkswagen or offer last-minute subsidies to compete with American incentives. It was to maintain exactly what had attracted Volkswagen in the first place. Regulatory consistency, trade agreements honored without exceptions, energy prices stable and predictable, government incentives delivered as promised, on schedule, with transparent criteria. The Canadian approach doesn't make headlines because consistency is boring, but for a capital allocation committee deciding where to spend $7 billion over 20 years, boring is exactly what you want. But Volkswagen didn't just choose Canada over America in isolation. This is part of a massive structural shift in German industrial strategy. The German Economic Institute released data showing German investment in the United States dropped 45% year over year in 2025. Between February and November, German firms invested 10.2 billion euros in America, down from almost 19 billion for the year before. Well, that's a collapse in confidence, and it's not limited to automotive. Chemical manufacturers, industrial equipment producers, pharmaceutical companies. German capital is reclassifying the United States from a low-risk anchor market to a high-risk variable that requires premium returns to justify exposure. Meanwhile, Canada is absorbing that investment. Between October 2021 and April 2024, automakers announced $46.1 billion in investments across the Canadian electric vehicle supply chain. That's verified by Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer. Not projections, official counts of actual committed capital, Honda building battery plants, General Motors expanding cathode production in Quebec, Stellantis and LG constructing their Windsor facility, Ford investing in Ontario operations. And now, Volkswagen's $7 billion St. Thomas battery plant. Each investment brings suppliers, logistics networks, research partnerships, and skilled workers who build lives around stable long-term employment. The mathematical result is simple. Predictable regulatory environment, plus honored trade agreements, plus stable energy costs, plus transparent government support equals lowest risk jurisdiction for 20-year capital deployment. Volkswagen ran the models. Germany's industrial strategists ran the models. Every European manufacturer with North American ambitions ran the models. The math consistently pointed north, not because Canada offered the biggest subsidies, because Canada offered the lowest unknowable costs. And unknowable costs are what kill billion-dollar industrial investments before they are even announced. Here's where it gets fascinating. Imagine you're on a capital allocation committee at a major European manufacturer. Your job is to decide where to spend billions over the next 20 years. You run models, forecast costs, analyze risk. Here's what you see when you look at the United States in 2025. Year 1, 10% tariff, manageable. You can model that. Year 1, month 6, tariff jumps to 25%. You adjust projections. Year 1, month 9, new tariffs on specific components. Your supply chain costs explode. Year 2, tariffs partially reduced for some countries but not others. Your competitors suddenly have different cost structures. You're competing against companies with unpredictable advantages you cannot forecast. And then, the president threatens to exit USMCA entirely. If that happens, everything resets to unknown. Those uncertainties have to compound, which forces risk premiums higher on any American investment, which makes the internal rate of return calculation fail at standard hurdle rates. So you need dramatically higher expected returns to justify American exposure. But automotive manufacturing operates on thin margins. Volume businesses with 3 to 5% net margins in good years. You cannot generate the returns needed to clear the new risk-adjusted hurdle rate. So the investment never gets approved. No announcement, no layoffs because nobody was hired yet. The jobs just never exist. And the capital that would have created those jobs, it flows to the jurisdiction where you can actually model 20-year costs. That's Canada. Here's the economic logic chain. Trump imposes unpredictable tariffs, which creates unknowable future costs, which forces manufacturers to demand higher returns to compensate for uncertainty. But thin margin industries cannot generate those higher returns. So capital allocation committees reject American projects, which eliminates the jobs those projects would have created, which means American manufacturing employment declines, which is exactly what's happening. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows 59,000 manufacturing jobs disappeared since April 2025. Not because companies deliberately destroy jobs, because they couldn't justify creating them in an unpredictable environment. This creates a fascinating dynamic. American politicians claim tariffs protect manufacturing jobs by making imports more expensive. But tariffs also make American manufacturing more expensive for companies operating integrated supply chains. If your supply chain depends on components crossing borders multiple times, and each crossing triggers tariffs, your total cost structure becomes uncompetitive globally. You're not competing against foreign manufacturers selling finished products into America. You're competing against manufacturers in Canada and Mexico who can build the same products with lower tariff exposure because their supply chains cross fewer high-tariff borders. American manufacturers lose competitiveness, not to China, to Canada. Meanwhile, Canada maintains exactly the regulatory environment that attracted investment in the first place. The Volkswagen battery plant in St. Thomas gets consistent treatment, permits processed on predictable timelines, environmental reviews completed professionally without political interference, energy supply contracted at stable rates locked for years, government incentives delivered as promised with transparent criteria, workers hired under labor regulations that don't change mid-project. Construction continues through political transitions without disruption. That consistency is Canada's competitive advantage, and it's permanent. The German Economic Institute's data confirms this pattern across industries. 45% decline in German investment isn't just automotive. It's chemicals, pharmaceuticals, industrial equipment, advanced manufacturing. Every sector where companies make long-term capital commitments based on 20-year cost models. Those models now classify America as high risk, not because American workers are less skilled, not because American infrastructure is inferior, because American policy is unpredictable. An unpredictable policy makes mathematical justification for billion-dollar investments impossible. While American manufacturing employment declines, Canada is building an industrial ecosystem that will last generations. Right now, as we speak, Volkswagen's PowerCo is building what will be one of the largest battery cell factories in the world. St. Thomas, Ontario, 90 gigawatt hours at full build-out, 3 sprawling factories on a 350-acre site. In October 2025, they started pouring concrete, over 500,000 square feet of formwork, more than 32,000 cubic meters of concrete, nearly 5,000 tons of reinforcing steel. This isn't a press release. This is physical infrastructure being built that will outlast every politician currently in office. PowerCo CEO Frank Blume said it directly. Quote, "Electric vehicles are the future of the global automotive sector, and we're proud to position Canada at the forefront of innovative EV battery production." End quote. Canada at the forefront. Not because Canada shouted the loudest or threatened the most, because Canada showed up consistently for years with exactly what manufacturers needed: stability. And that $7 billion investment brings everything that follows. Construction jobs during the build phase, permanent manufacturing jobs when production starts, engineering positions, quality control specialists, logistics coordinators. Every direct job creates multiplier effects: housing demand, retail expansion, healthcare services, schools serving workers' families. But the Volkswagen plant isn't isolated. It's part of an ecosystem. The Stellantis LG battery plant in Windsor coming online this year. The General Motors cathode plant in Quebec 2/3 complete. Chemical processors building facilities nearby to serve these factories. Component manufacturers relocating operations to reduce supply chain distance. Universities aligning research programs with industry needs. Engineering graduates taking jobs in Canadian facilities instead of American ones. This is what economists call path dependency. Once infrastructure gets built, it generates its own gravity. The ecosystem becomes self-reinforcing. The human cost of America's manufacturing decline falls on communities that build identities around industrial employment, of 59,000 jobs lost since April 2025. But those aren't just statistics. Those are families where manufacturing wages supported middle-class lifestyles for generations. Towns where high school graduates could get union jobs with pensions and benefits. Communities where home ownership was achievable without college degrees. That economic model is disappearing in America, not because of inevitable globalization, because Trump's tariff chaos made American manufacturing uncompetitive versus Canada. Volkswagen ran the numbers. German capital allocation committees ran the numbers. Every European manufacturer with North American ambitions ran the numbers. The math pointed north. And once that capital commits, it doesn't come back. The St. Thomas battery plant represents a 20 to 30-year commitment. The workforce being hired today will retire from those jobs. Their children will grow up in communities built around stable manufacturing employment. Those workers will pay Canadian taxes, contribute to Canadian pension funds, support Canadian small businesses, send kids to Canadian universities. The wealth generated by $7 billion in German investment will compound in Canadian communities for generations. Meanwhile, American manufacturing employment continues declining. The jobs tariffs were supposed to protect are disappearing because the industries themselves are relocating, not to China, to Canada. The companies Trump threatened are choosing Canada's boring stability over America's exciting chaos. And every factory that gets built in St. Thomas or Windsor, instead of Ohio or Michigan, represents permanent strategic advantage Canada gains. While America loses industrial capacity, it will not recover. Mark Carney hasn't been making dramatic speeches about this shift. He doesn't need to. The investment speaks for itself. $7 billion from Volkswagen, $46 billion across the EV supply chain. German investment in America collapsing 45% while flowing north. Canada isn't winning through threats or tariffs or trade wars. Canada is winning by being exactly what it's always been. Stable, predictable, boring. And in an unstable world, boring is worth $7 billion and counting. The end game is clear. For the next 50 years, the infrastructure being built right now in St. Thomas, in Windsor, in Quebec, will outlast every politician currently in office. The jobs being created will become careers. The careers will become communities. The communities will become the foundation of Canadian advanced manufacturing for generations. This isn't a political victory, this is an economic foundation. And it was built the Canadian way, not by threatening neighbors, not by starting trade wars, not by calling other countries security threats, by staying exactly what Canada has always been: stable, consistent, reliable, boring. Trump's tariff chaos doesn't get easier to navigate, it gets more complex. New tariffs announced, old tariffs modified, exemptions granted to some countries but not others. Threats to exit trade agreements entirely. Each new development makes 20-year cost modeling more impossible. American manufacturers cannot plan. Foreign investors cannot commit. And every month that uncertainty persists, more capital allocation committees reject American projects and approve Canadian alternatives. The jobs that would have been created in Ohio get created in Ontario. The tax revenue that would have funded American schools funds Canadian infrastructure. The pension contributions that would have supported American retirees support Canadian workers. The social consequences in America from manufacturing decline are already visible. Communities in the Rust Belt that never recovered from previous waves of deindustrialization face another round. The manufacturing jobs that were supposed to return through tariffs are vanishing instead. Towns where factory employment was the economic foundation lose population as young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. Housing values decline. Small businesses close. Tax revenues drop. Schools and hospitals struggle with reduced funding. The American dream built on manufacturing employment becomes unattainable for the next generation. Canada, meanwhile, is building an economic model that prioritizes stability over excitement. The message to global manufacturers is consistent and clear. Build here. We honor agreements. We maintain consistent regulations. We deliver energy at stable prices. We don't weaponize trade policy. We don't threaten to abandon treaties because a new administration takes office. We're boring. And boring generates $7 billion commitments from companies like Volkswagen, who need predictability to justify multi-decade investments. Here's what makes this permanent. Capital responds to track records, not promises. After years of policy chaos, global firms have reclassified the United States from a low-risk anchor market to a high-risk variable that requires premium returns to justify exposure. That classification takes years, maybe decades of sustained stability to reverse. Germany's industrial strategists will not forget the $2.5 billion Volkswagen lost to unpredictable tariffs in just 9 months. They will not forget the factory they had to cancel. They will not forget that American policy made billion-dollar investments mathematically impossible to justify. That institutional memory is permanent. Trump thought calling Canada the 51st state would pressure Ottawa into submission. He permanently strengthened Canada's industrial independence instead. He made Canadian stability more valuable by demonstrating American unpredictability. He gave Carney and every Canadian trade negotiator the perfect justification for investing in alternatives to American dependence. Every insult, every threat, every tariff announcement, each one made Canada's boring consistency more attractive to global capital. Trump spent political capital trying to dominate Canada. Canada spent that same period building physical capital that will generate returns for 50 years. Germany paid attention. 45% decline in American investment. $7 billion flowing to Canada instead. Volkswagen building in St. Thomas what they canceled in America. The ecosystem following. Suppliers, researchers, skilled workers, entire supply chains relocating to serve Canadian manufacturing. This is the cost of unpredictability, not measured in diplomatic protests or United Nations votes. Measured in factories that get built somewhere else, jobs that get created in other countries, and tax revenue generated in other jurisdictions, a wealth that compounds in other communities. Trump called Canada the 51st state to suggest Canada isn't really sovereign. Germany responded by investing $7 billion in Canadian sovereignty. The world responded by moving $46 billion in electric vehicle supply chain investment to Canadian soil. Capital responded by reclassifying America as high risk while consolidating Canada as the stable North American manufacturing base. They said Canada needed America to survive. Turns out the world needed what Canada had all along, stability. And that's worth more than $20 billion and counting. Canada wins, America loses. And Trump built the proof himself by making American unpredictability more expensive than Canadian consistency.